Chapter 6. All through the night the fog thickened. Hours before daylight, the Wanderer, headed by Captain Inglehorn toward the Norwegian skipper's incredible island, had slowed to little more than steerage way. When morning came, she was still creeping through a yellow-white blanket, miles in extent. Against the penetrating dampness of this blanket, no garment was proof. The clothes of everyone drooped in loose, sodden folds. Water dripped everywhere from spars, stays, and walls, and gathering on the cold deck ran in slow, uncertain rivulets. At a distance of a dozen feet, men in such solid objects as masts and ventilators became vaguely wavering wraiths. At greater distances, they vanished behind the soft, yellow-white silence. Up on the bridge, Denham and Englehorn, Driscoll and Ann could see nothing of the sailor who heaved a lead in the bow, or of the other sailor who tried to pierce the thick veil from the high vantage point of the crow's nest. These could be heard, however. By some atmospheric trick, their voices seemed to ring more loudly through the fog than they had ever come through clear sunlight. "This triple-damned fog!" Denham choked. He could scarcely speak from excitement. He was as tense as a man on a tight rope, and he never stopped staring forward into the enwrapping cloud. "Are you sure of your position, Skipper?" "Sure," Inglehorn murmured placidly and cut himself some fresh plug cut. "Last night, before this stuff closed around us, I got a fine sight." "Jack," Ann whispered, taking a fresh hold on Driscoll's hand. "If we don't get somewhere soon, I'll explode. I never was so excited in my life." "Don't bounce around so," Driscoll warned her. "Next thing you know, you'll be rolling off the ship. And don't," he added more soberly, "keep doing things to get me excited. I'm fit to be tied right now. I'd like to throw my cap up into the air and yell blue blazes. But when I think of what we may be taking you into, I know I've got to keep my head." "If your position is right, Skipper," said Denham, "we ought to be near the island. If we don't see it when this fog lifts," Inglehorn murmured confidently, "we never shall. We've quartered these parts. Either we're on top of it, or we've found blue water in the place it should be." The high, intent voice of the sailor in the bow came sharply up to the bridge. "No bottom at 30 fathoms. "Of course," Driscoll ventured almost hopefully, "that Norse skipper was just guessing at the position." "How will we know it's the right island?" Ann asked. "I told you," Denham rasped impatiently. "The mountain!" His eyes tried to pierce the fog. "The mountain that looks like a skull. I'd forgotten," Ann apologized. "Of course, Skull Mountain. Bottom!" The high voice shot back from the bow, and at that triumphant cry they all stiffened. "Bottom! 20 fathoms!" "I knew it," Inglehorn chewed placidly. "She's shallowing fast. Dead slow, Mr. Driscoll. Tell 'em!" Driscoll tore into the wheelhouse and spoke down the engine room tube. Bells jangled below in reply, and the Wanderer dropped off to a speed that was scarcely more than drifting. "Look!" Ann cried. "Isn't the fog thinner?" 16, came the voice from the bow. 16 fathoms! "What does she draw, Skipper?" Denham demanded. 6. For the first time, Inglehorn was stirred out of his customary placidity. He was like Denham now, staring intently, listening even more intently. "Listen," Ann whispered. "What do you hear?" Denham whispered back. Ann shook her head and with the other three continued to listen. Suddenly the young, nervous voice of Jimmy dropped down from the crow's nest. "Breakers! Where away?" Driscoll shouted. "Dead ahead!" Driscoll leaped for the wheelhouse and the engine room tube again. His order came out to the others sharp and clear, and its dying note was followed by the jangle of the engine room's bells and the roll and thunder of the Wanderer's reversing engines. 10 fathoms, called the man in the bow. "Let go!" Inglehorn roared mightily. Up forward, dim wraiths leaped to action. A chain clanked and rattled through a hawse-pipe. An anchor splashed. More bells jangled below. The Wanderer was suddenly motionless and still. Everyone listened. "That's not breakers," Driscoll declared roundly. "It's drums," Englehorn murmured, placid once more. The fog, which had been thinning almost imperceptibly, lifted while they listened. Before the edge of a brisk, shearing wind it parted and rolled away. The blue sea lay exposed under a sun but faintly veiled, and a little way off, hardly more than a quarter of a mile, a high wooded island with a skull-like knob reached out toward the ship with a long, brush-covered finger of sand and rocks. "Skull Mountain!" Denham flung out a victorious arm. "Do you see it? And the wall! The wall! The wall!" He struck Inglehorn's back a mighty blow. "There it is! Do you believe me now?" Just short of hysteria, he half climbed, half slid down from the bridge and raced toward the bow of the ship. "Get out the boats!" he shouted back. "Get out the boats!" "Jack!" cried Ann. "Did you ever see anything like it? Isn't it wonderful?" All the excitement drained out of Driscoll as he looked down at her face. His mouth tightened somberly. He strode forward to direct the lowering of the boats and the stowing of equipment. After a little, Denham came rushing back to where the crew were loading the boats, and Ann went down to him. "I'm going ashore with you, aren't I?" she asked. "You bet." Driscoll, overhearing, left his work promptly. "Ought she to quit the ship before we find out what's going on, what we're likely to run into?" "Look here, Jack," Denham complained cheerfully. "Who's running this show? I've learned by bitter experience to keep my cast and my cameras all together and right with me. How do I know when I'll want 'em?" "But Mr. Denham," Driscoll half turned from Ann to keep her from hearing. "It's crazy to risk." "Get back to work, Jack," Denham directed bluntly. "Go on, deal out rifles and ammunition. See that a dozen of the gas bombs are taken, and pick me a couple of huskies to carry my picture stuff." Driscoll wavered, and then with a helpless shrug and a last frown in Ann's direction turned to his sailors. Denham shook his head in amiable exasperation and winked at Ann. "Have somebody get the costume box up and into one of the boats," he said. "If we're lucky, we may get a swell shot right away." As Ann went below, Denham mounted to the bridge. There Inglehorn was sweeping the island with his binoculars. "See anything, Skipper?" "Nothing but those few huts at the edge of the brush on the peninsula. I took a look from the bow, and I think there are more and bigger houses back in the thicker brush. It's the first native island I ever called it where the whole tribe didn't come down to the beach for a look-see. The tribe is somewhere, sure enough. Hear those drums?" Englehorn nodded, and both men listened. A deep, soft clamor rolled across the intervening water and slowly resolved itself into a swift, importunate rhythm. "Funny they haven't spotted us," Denham said. "Every last native ought to be out and down at the water's edge," Englehorn insisted. "Maybe they have seen us and are signaling." "You've heard native drums before, Mr. Denham," Englehorn demurred calmly. "You know those ain't signal beats. There's some ceremony inland, a big ceremony too, if you ask me." He descended from the bridge and walked quietly over to where by now Driscoll had practically completed the work of lowering the boats and loading them. He watched for a space and then looked toward the forward deck. "Fetch the boatswain," he commanded. That petty officer, a thick, heavy sailorman, hurried up. "This man will stay aboard with 14 sailors," Inglehorn said to Driscoll. "You choose the 14. All the others will go ashore with us." Driscoll nodded soberly and went about the selection. He chose Lumpy first of all, to that veteran adventurer's audible chagrin. "Who'll be in charge of my gas bombs?" Denham wanted to know. "You take 'em, Jimmy," Driscoll ordered. Jimmy stooped over the box, hefted it experimentally, looked slightly injured at the weight of it, and then bore his burden over to the last boat. "Of course you're coming, Skipper," Denham asked. "Got to keep my record clear," Englehorn nodded. "Never yet missed looking over a native island once I caught up with it." "You're likely to be a big help. You'll probably have to do the talking. Their lingo isn't likely to be one I've picked up." "All right," Driscoll said. "Both boats are ready." Inglehorn and Denham climbed down into the first one, and at the order of the former, the crew pushed off. Driscoll motioned the second boat to wait where it swung on its davits. Ann was hurrying across the deck. He helped her in silently, then directed that the boat be lowered. While it settled into the water, he took a last look around deck. "Better serve out rifles and ammunition," he said to the boatswain. "And it wouldn't hurt to do some figuring on the range from here to the island." With a last look, he swung over the side and joined Ann. "This is the first time I ever saw the whole crew together," Ann said. "I hadn't realized it was so large." 20 men in each boat," Driscoll told her. "And," he added gloomily, "we'll need 'em." "Nonsense. Probably the natives will be as friendly as reservation Indians." "More probably not. Hear those drums? I overheard the skipper tell Denham they were beating up some kind of ceremony. I wish I knew what kind." "Maybe they're announcing some pretty girl's engagement." Driscoll looked at her. Her yellow hair was bare to the sun and blowing about her flushed, excited face. "Speaking of pretty girls' engagements," he said, and looked back up at the crow's nest. But the drums grew louder with every tug of the boat's oars. The rhythm grew more distinct, and as Inglehorn had said, it sounded too majestic to be a mere signal. Driscoll's momentary elation left him. Inglehorn's boat had reached the beach, and Denham was already ashore, putting his camera on its tripod. While Driscoll's crew spurted through the surf, the producer burdened one sailor with the mounted machine, another with a case of films, and a third with a box containing costumes. Meanwhile, Inglehorn was dividing cases of trade goods among the others. Jimmy, showing his grievance in every line of his young face, shouldered the heavy container which held the gas bombs. "You stick close to me, Jimmy," Denham directed, "and watch your step. There's enough trichloride in that case to put a herd of hippos to sleep." "Are we going to see any hippos?" Jimmy wanted to know. "Something a lot more exciting, I hope. Where's Driscoll?" Driscoll came trotting over, followed by Ann. His boat was beached alongside the other. "Leave an armed man in charge of each boat." "All attended to. Stay by me, Ann." "I'll look after Ann," Driscoll announced quickly. Denham chuckled. The wild excitement of those moments preceding the sighting of the island was gone. He was once more solid, indomitable, and quick with a characteristic tolerance. "All right, Jack. All set, skipper." Inglehorn nodded. He and Driscoll signaled, and the two boat crews fell into a loose double column. Denham, already striding vigorously toward the scattered houses visible at the edge of the brush, automatically became the head of the line of march. Behind him paced the men bearing camera and films, then Inglehorn, then Driscoll, and Ann. As the party sloped up from the water line and achieved some small elevation, the wall began to bulk large, although still far off. It was enormous. The Norwegian skipper's crude sketch had poorly estimated the mighty barrier which ran the full extent of the peninsula. Brush closed in upon its base. There were even occasional intervening trees. But all growth stopped far below the rampart's top. Its vastness was not dwarfed even by the overhanging precipice. It was made chiefly of huge logs. At one point, however, there seemed to be a gate hinged to massive stone pillars supporting the story of the structure's antiquity. The cadenced drum beats grew louder as the wanderers' party approached, but no living persons were seen in the straggling huts first met up with. None appeared even when the explorers were past the outskirts of the village. The size of this indicated a tribe of several hundred members, filling an area of 6 or 8 city blocks. The houses were all large and quite widely separated. Each was enclosed and partially masked by the thick brush. Narrow paths through the undergrowth were the only connecting links. Each stood otherwise by itself in the center of a bare circle beaten to dusty surface smoothness by many feet. One extraordinary detail made the village different from any which either Inglehorn or Denham had ever seen. This was the scattering of magnificent broken columns of carved stone and fragments of skillfully built walls. These stood on every hand, but the majority were forward, closer to the wall. "My guess," said Denham, pointing to the barrier, "is that it must once have been the outer defense of a sizable city. Isn't it enormous?" "Colossal," Inglehorn agreed. "It's almost Egyptian," Denham mused. "Who do you suppose could have built it?" Ann asked in an awed tone. "I went up to Angkor once," Driscoll remarked in solemn admiration. "That's bigger than this. Nobody knows who built it either." "What a chance," Denham exulted. "What a picture." Still no one was sighted. But suddenly, between two steps, the roll of the drums softened, and now, above their low purring note, voices rose in a wildly swelling chant. Driscoll halted and flung up an arm in warning. Ann clutched Driscoll's sleeve, and the sailors looked at one another apprehensively. The sound of the chant came from somewhere close to the wall. Denham motioned to Inglehorn and pointed to an unusually large house ahead. "If we get around that," he said, "I'll bet we will see them." "Do you hear what they're saying?" Ann whispered to Driscoll. "They're shouting, 'Kong! Kong!' Denham," Driscoll called. "Do you catch that? They're at some god ceremony." "I hear," Denham said. "Come on." Moving forward cautiously, he beckoned Inglehorn closer. "Think you can speak their lingo?" "Can't catch any words yet." Inglehorn listened acutely. "It does, though, sound a bit like the talk of the Nias Islanders." "What luck if it is enough alike," Denham laughed. They were directly at the masking house now, and Denham halted, waving the rest of the column to close up and gather near. He himself advanced guardedly to the corner of the house. "Easy now," he whispered. Stay here till I see what is going on." He disappeared while Driscoll, with Ann keeping close, eyed his men to measure their degree of readiness, and Inglehorn bit off another half-inch of plug cut. He came back with his eyes blazing. "Holy mackerel!" he whispered. "Inglehorn! Driscoll! Get a look at this thing!" But be quiet. Himself eager for quiet that he moved upon tiptoes, he motioned to the camera-bearer, took over the machine and tripod, and slowly began to work it around the corner of the house. While he maneuvered, the drums rolled softly. Above their murmurous rhythm, the explosive shout of many voices rose like thunder, ecstatic, triumphant, awed, fearful. All these emotions were conveyed by turns. Irresistibly drawn, the sailors and Ann drifted slowly forward until, standing clear of the masking house, they looked upon the chanting host. Chapter 7. In front of them lay a great beaten square which ended only at the wall. Frowning down upon this square stood the tremendous gate, sighted dimly back on the beach. Up to the gate's sill rose a series of broad stone steps, and halfway up the steps, on a rude dais covered with skins, knelt a young native girl. There could not have been found in any tribe many maidens as smoothly attractive as she, and the woven strands of flowers, which served as crown, girdle, and necklace and her only apparel, increased her soft, frightened charm. On either side of the girl, some on the stairs, some in the square, the chanting natives swayed in ordered ranks. A little to one side, but dominating the scene by eye and gesture, a wizened, coal-black witch doctor pranced in a solemn ritualistic dance. Still farther to one side, a veritable giant, magnificently costumed in furs, grass, and feathers, watched with a kingly detachment. To the last one, men, women, children, witch doctor, and king, all were so wrapped up in the ceremony that none noticed the newly arrived audience. "Oh, Lord," Denham whispered. "Make 'em hold it," and he began to crank his camera. "What's that old guy in the feathered dress doing?" Jimmy asked under his breath. Very close to the flower-dressed girl, the witch doctor began an oddly supplicating gyration. His hands, in slow, humble gestures, seemed to offer the maiden to a dozen huge dancers who leaped out of the chanting ranks, a terrifying dozen, whose heads were concealed by hollowed, furry skulls, and whose bodies were hidden by rough, black skins. "Gorillas!" Inglehorn murmured thoughtfully. "Those bucks are playing at being gorillas or something like. They're acting out a ritual." He looked suddenly back at Ann, and then moved to put his lean figure squarely between her and the natives. Moved by a seemingly common impulse, the Wanderer's whole crew jostled more closely together, until Ann had to push some of them aside and stand on tiptoe. Even then she was well concealed. As the gigantic ape-like beings advanced, the witch doctor moved back and looked toward the king. It was plainly His Majesty's time to enter the ceremony. What his part was, the watchers were not to know until long after, for as he shifted his position, the corner of one eye took in Denham at the camera, and then the whole party of watchers. "Bado!" he shouted and wheeled to face them. "Bado damapati vego!" The chanting, the dancing, all sound, all movement turned into a dead, stony silence. In the midst of this, Inglehorn's placid, practical voice went forward to Denham. "There's luck," he murmured. "I can understand his lingo. He's telling the old witch doctor to stop, to wear strangers." All the natives had turned and were staring, and as though an order had come to them out of the silence, the women and children began to slip away. "Look," Jimmy said, "their women are clearing out. We'd better beat it, or we'll be up to our necks in trouble." He whirled around to start for the beach, but Driscoll seized his arm. "Good catch, Jack," Denham called from his forward position as spear point of the party. "No use trying to hide now. Everybody stand fast. Put up a bold front." The gigantic king, after a full stare, made up his mind. His great arm beckoned two warriors only a little smaller than himself, and so guarded he moved slowly forward. The last of the women and children vanished. "Mr. Denham," Jimmy cried, "what's the big bozo up to?" "Shut up," Denham answered, without taking his eyes off the king. "I don't know." The chief took another slow, majestic stride. "Jack," whispered Ann, "does it mean trouble when the women and children go away?" "Trouble for those fellows if they start anything," Jack assured her and laughed briskly. The chief continued to advance. Some of the sailors shifted their rifles, and their fingers sought the triggers. Denham, as though he had eyes in the back of his head, called a warning. "Steady, boys, there's nothing to get nervous about." "And that's the truth," Jack told Ann cheerfully. "It's all bluff so far. The chief's waiting to see if we'll scare. It's all a game of bluff, and I'm betting on us." The chief stopped a half-dozen paces in front of Denham and waited. "Come on, Skipper," the producer called. "If you can talk his lingo, make a friendly speech." Inglehorn started to move closer, but the chief flung up an arresting hand. "Watu, Tamadi! Tamadi! Greetings," Inglehorn replied slowly. "We are your friends. Bala, bala, friends, friends! Bali, rari!" the king shouted scornfully. "Tasco, Tasco!" "What's he say, Skipper?" Denham asked out of a corner of his mouth. "Says he wants no friends. Tells us to beat it." "Talk him out of it," Denham ordered. "Ask him what the ceremony is." Englehorn spoke in placid, conciliating tones and pointed to the flower-dressed girl. "Ani Saba Kong," said the king doubtfully, and from all the natives came a sighing, worshipful murmur. "Saba Kong. He says the girl is the bride of Kong." "Kong!" Denham cried exultantly. "Didn't I tell you?" Before either king or interpreter could speak again, the witch doctor suddenly leaped forward, his headdress shaking, his eyes darting fury at both king and strangers. "Dama si Vego!" he screamed. His old, frail voice ran on like a discordant violin note. "Dama si Vego! Punya, Punya Bas!" "What's up now?" Denham demanded. "He says the ceremony's spoiled because we've seen it." "Let me get at him," Denham said confidently. "What's the word for friend?" "Bala." Denham squared his shoulders and spread out his hands, taking a smiling, conciliatory step. "Bala," he said. "Bala, Bala!" He pointed to himself and then to the king and the witch doctor. "Bala, Bala, Bala!" The king hesitated, but the old sorcerer had not the faintest doubt of his proper course. His frown was as deep as Denham's smile was wide. His hand beckoned the warriors up from the rear. "Tasco!" he screamed. The king, taking his cue, roared, "Tasco!" The two guards beside him swung their spears up to a position of ready. The masked warriors behind began to surge forward. Excitement overcoming fright, Anne balanced herself against Driscoll and rose high on her tiptoes to see. Her foaming, honey-colored hair caught the sun and the king's eye in the same instant. He ceased his shout as though his mouth had been clamped shut and stared, first at Anne and then at the witch doctor, as though for confirmation. "Malam Mapakano," he stammered. "Sita!" He jerked his arm at the witch doctor. "Malam, Malam Mapakeno." The witch doctor, his cries also ceasing, stared too. The warriors stopped stock still and their weapon points fell. "Now what?" Denham asked with a little gesture of relief. "He said," Inglehorn explained, "look, the woman of gold." "Blondes are scarce around here," Denham chuckled. The king's voice rose ecstatically. "Kong! Malam Mapakano! Kong Wabisa! Kaubisa para Kong!" And he turned to the witch doctor seeking agreement. The old sorcerer nodded thoughtfully as Inglehorn translated swiftly. "The woman of gold. Kong's gift. A gift for Kong." "Good Lord," Denham protested. The king and the witch doctor advanced upon Denham, and the former thrust out his arm in regal command. "Dama," he said. "Tebo malam nahi! Stranger, sell the woman to us!" Inglehorn's translation followed like pistol cracks, and his eyes asked what Denham proposed to do. "Dia malam," the king hurried on. "6 women," Inglehorn said swiftly. "He will give 6 for yours of gold," Anne gasped and tried to smile. "You got Anne into this, Denham," Driscoll cried. "What's our cue?" Denham smiled briefly, and with an unhurried gesture called up his 2 carriers. "Tell him as politely as you can," he said to Inglehorn, "that we'd rather not swap." Out of a corner of his mouth he added to Anne, "This isn't my trading day, sister." "Tita?" Englehorn murmured to the king in sorrow-stricken tones. "No, Malamati Rota Nani. Our woman is our luck, and we dare not part with her." Against that refusal, bland though it had been, the witch doctor cried in fury. "Watu!" he screamed. "Tambisa para Kong Diwanata." "They can't lose Kong's gift." "That's enough for me," Driscoll growled as Inglehorn tossed back the swift interpretation. "I'm taking Anne back to the ship." "We'd all better slide out," Inglehorn warned Denham casually, "before that smart old witch doctor thinks to send out a war party to get between us and our boats." "I suppose so." Denham spoke reluctantly, with all the white explorer's confidence in his racial superiority. "But don't let's leave the old coot so mad, Skipper. Tell him we'll be back tomorrow to make friends and talk things over." "Dulu," Englehorn promised the chief and the witch doctor gently, and the promise made cover for the quick retreat of the men who bore the camera and the tripod. "Tomorrow, Hai Tego Na, we return then." "And Malam?" the chief insisted. "Malam Mapakano? The woman of gold." Get going, Denham ordered briskly to the crew. And keep smiling, Ann. Don't you realize the chief's just paid you a whopping compliment? 6 for 1. Smile at Jack and keep your chin up. Dula Bala, Englehorn told the chief reassuringly. Tomorrow, friend. The retreat gathered speed, but not too much speed. There was no lagging, but on the other hand there was no undue haste, only an expeditious, smiling withdrawal. A half-dozen sailors led by Driscoll went first, with Ann in their center. Next, the main body moved. Rifles alert, Englehorn followed these, and Denham went last. As a parting sign of friendship, his hand tossed the witch doctor a debonair salute. The same hand cocked his hat over one eye, and as the hand dropped to a holstered pistol, his lips puckered up to whistle a marching tune. While the natives' eyes widened in surprise, he slid briskly around the corner of the house and out of the tribe's sight. Following the narrow paths among houses as silent and seemingly as uninhabited as had been encountered on the inward trek, the wanderers' party came at length to the edge of the village. Forward extended the almost treeless stretch of land running down to the beach and the boats. "Don't tell me there wasn't nobody in them houses," Jimmy snorted, shifting his box of bombs to the other shoulder. "I heard a kid squall once, and boy, what a smack his mama handed him. I heard that too." Driscoll, with a half-laugh of relief, let go the small hand he had held protectingly all along the march. "Believe it or not," he said with a last backward glance, "nobody is following us. And if that isn't a surprise as unexpected as it was pleasant, I want to know." Denham and Englehorn came trotting up. "I hope," Ann laughed half at them and half at Driscoll, "that you all know me well enough to understand I'm no warlike, bragging Brunhild. But just the same, I want to say I wouldn't have missed it for the mint." She nodded emphatically, and with a broad pretense of pride began to fluff out the hair which had been so much admired. Driscoll eyed her provoking mouth with an exasperation which did not conceal his admiration for her courage. "You can be my next leading lady, too," Denham promised. Englehorn cut himself a fresh chew and waved them all to the boats. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll break out the trade goods. I think, Mr. Denham, a few presents to that witch doctor ought to get us somewhere." Chapter 8. When they were gathered in the skipper's cabin back on the Wanderer, Denham put the question which had grown steadily in all minds during the long row out from the beach. He spoke somberly to a somber audience. In the moment of arrival at the boats, their mood had been one of exhilaration over the lucky outcome of their encounter. Now, however, they had had time to ponder the danger they had run, and even more than that, the ominous mystery which prompted Denham to speak. "I want to know," he said, "who this Kong is that the king and the witch doctor jabbered about." "Mightn't he be the king himself?" asked Ann. "No," Englehorn declared. "You saw how frightened that young girl was. She wouldn't have been frightened, not much anyway, if they'd fixed her up for the boss. She'd have been happy, more likely. Going to him would have been big luck. But she was scared, half out of her senses." "I think those fellows dressed up as gorillas are the key," Driscoll said. "Why?" Denham wanted to know, and eyed his assistant speculatively. "Just a hunch. I figure they were acting as the real bridegroom's representatives. On top of that big gate there hung a huge metal drum, and beside it I saw a native ready to sound off. And I'm ready to swear that when the king saw us and stopped the show, he was about to direct the opening of the gate." "I think I follow you," Denham said. "Well, I don't," Ann exclaimed. "I'm completely in the dark." "The king," Driscoll explained slowly, "was about to send the girl out to whatever is beyond the gate. Now what could that be? The whole village is on this side, safely behind the wall. Beyond, there could be nothing but wild jungle, and that danger against which the tribe maintains the wall. The king was going to open the gate in order to offer the girl to whatever feared thing lives in the jungle. He was sending out a bride to Kong, and the fellow up at the drum was going to call Kong to come and get her." Denham nodded. "My guess," Englehorn murmured, "is that today's pretty little girl wasn't by any means the first of Kong's brides." "You mean?" Ann felt suddenly sick. "He means," Driscoll broke in roughly, "that the girl was a sacrifice, and that there is a fresh sacrifice at regular intervals, every time the moon is full, or something like that. But even agreeing to all this," Englehorn puzzled, "I haven't yet any clear idea of what Kong is." "I have," Denham said with abrupt conviction. That wall wasn't built against any pint-sized danger. There were a dozen proxy bridegrooms, because only with so many could the natives approximate the size of the creature which was getting the sacrifice. And those gorilla skins that the dancers wore didn't mean that Kong is a gorilla by a long shot. If he's really there, he's a brute big enough to use a gorilla for a medicine ball. But there never was such a beast. Ann laughed uncertainly, at least not since prehistoric times. Denham shifted in his seat to stare. Holy mackerel, he whispered. I wonder if you've hit it, Ann? Rot, Driscoll exploded. Inglehorn shook an unbelieving head. Don't be so sure, Denham argued, and excitement mounted in him again, as it had at the first sight of land. Remember? Both of you said we wouldn't find any Skull Mountain Island. But here it is. Why shouldn't such an out-of-the-way spot be just the place to find a solitary, surviving prehistoric freak? His eyes flashed. Holy mackerel! If we did find the brute, what a picture! The shock of that expressed hope sent Driscoll to his feet. Where will Ann figure in a picture like that? He demanded. Denham rose, too, in angry response to the challenging question. But, after an instant, he laughed. Jack, he said plaintively, can't you let me run my own show? I suppose you had to go soft, and I guess Ann is plenty excuse, but don't expect me to pass up the picture there'll be if we really get the break I'm imagining. He pulled thoughtfully at one ear. I'll admit, he conceded, that right now I can't think just where any of us will figure. That'll need a lot of doping out. Englehorn agreed. Here's what, Denham went on. We'll sign off everything until after supper. By then I'll have at least the next step planned. In the meantime, Englehorn said, you see to posting a few guards with rifles, Mr. Driscoll. That old witch doctor is up to something. The drums have started up again. While the four talked, the drums had indeed gradually renewed their rolling. Their cadence was different now, a low drone as of men thinking aloud, or better yet of the sound primitive hands might beat out in order to make easier for primitive minds the hard business of thinking. With the guards posted, Driscoll came back to Englehorn and looked toward the sky. There'll be plenty of clouds to hide the moon, he predicted. It'll be a dark night, and that isn't going to help. Mr. Denham is right, the skipper joked him placidly. You've gone soft over Ann. A dark night won't hurt. We're too far offshore for the natives to try a surprise. I don't like those drums. The drums continued to trouble Driscoll as the quick, tropic twilight fell and deepened, but when he sat down to supper he tried to conceal his anxiety. This was harder because Denham kept them all waiting for his promised plan. I told you I'd figure out the next step, he finally began at the close of the meal. And I have. I've got no further, but at least I've made up my mind to this. I'm going ashore bright and early tomorrow. With a strong party there'll be no danger, and I've absolutely got to find out about Kong. Driscoll pushed his coffee cup away and looked toward Ann. Drink hearty, Jack. Denham smiled. Ann will stay snug and safe on board ship. Good, murmured Inglehorn. I'm ready to go if you need me, Ann spoke up. No. Ordinarily, I'm dead against separating my cast from my camera, but ordinarily my people have to face only dangers I can measure and prepare against. Here we have an unknown quantity, so I'll leave you in safety while I go for a look-see. Let me look for you, Driscoll said eagerly. Of course, there won't be any danger with a strong party, but if you should happen to get hurt, the picture would be held up. If I bump into a tree or something, it won't matter. Oh, won't it? Ann cried. Ready to die for dear old Rutgers, Driscoll, now I've let Ann off? Denham chuckled. Well, you can go straight to hell, son. When I organize a parade, I always lead it. But just the same, he went on, I take back part of what I said about you going soft. I guess you're soft in only one spot. Driscoll flushed down to his neck and back to his closely set ears. I've got some work to polish off below, he said, and retreated before Inglehorn's and Denham's laughter. I, said Ann with great dignity, getting up too, am not amused. But she smiled back at them as she went out to the deck. The drums were still droning thoughtfully on Skull Mountain Island. On the deck, at intervals, the armed guards made watchful silhouettes. A few other sailors were out too, seeking relief from the heat which had succeeded the fog. Lumpy was one of these. Stretched out on a hatch, in his frayed trousers, he played lazily with Ignatz. Good evening, Lumpy. Evenin', Miss Ann. Move over, Ignatz. Give the lady a seat. I hear you had a big time ashore. I was pretty scared. They sat for a little, Lumpy too lethargic to talk, and soothed by the soft blackness. Denham and Inglehorn halted on their way to the bridge. "Hear those drums?" Denham said. "Damn it, if I could take moving pictures by firelight, I'd sneak back there this minute." "You're a lot better off here, Mr. Denham." "I know, but I hate to miss anything. It's all right with me if we miss a lot. Look here, Skipper, it's enough to have Driscoll worrying." "I'm hardly worrying, but I'm glad a guard is set, and I have a notion not to turn in." "Shaw, all the natives are busy ashore." "I suppose so, but still, I think I'll stay around." "I'll stay too then," Denham laughed. "We'll start a good game of pinochle." Lumpy sat up and peered at Ann through the darkness. "Whatever happened ashore to get that cold old turtle so het up?" he demanded. "I think," said Ann slowly, "that it must have been the girl." "Girl?" "The one they were sacrificing, to Kong." "Oh yeah," Lumpy nodded. "Some of the boys were telling me. The bride." "The bride of Kong," Ann whispered and shivered. "Lumpy, what do you suppose Kong is?" "Ah!" Lumpy declared scornfully. "Just an old heathen god. Every tribe has a god, usually an old log or mud statue. I'll bet Kong's just a lump of mud, and that the bride never gets within a mile of him. The old witch doctor probably could tell you better where she goes. Them old witch doctors usually have a harem hid off somewheres." Ann laughed, and shifting a little for a more comfortable position, sat on Ignatz's leg. That sensitive monkey squeaked and fled indignantly. "Catch him, Lumpy," Ann said. "He'll get into the cabins and break something." "Here, you varmint," Lumpy called and ran. Ann rose and lifted her arms sleepily. She was rested and relaxed by the talk with Lumpy. She could forget Kong now. She walked slowly down to where the deck became a narrow alley, leading past the deckhouse. For just an instant she hesitated there. The light from the deckhouse glinted on her yellow hair before she moved on into the thick, swallowing darkness. The drums on Skull Mountain Island swelled to a deafening clamor, then fell to a low, chuckling tattoo. Up on the bridge, Denham talked confidently to Inglehorn. "We'll make friends with them, all right, Skipper. They didn't like our breaking into the ceremony, but we can convince them that was an accident." "I don't know," Inglehorn demurred. "They said we spoiled the show. They probably meant they'd have to find Kong another bride." "Great. If they do it all over again, I'll get a picture as sure as shooting." Inglehorn looked at his employer in incredulous admiration. "You're the limit," he declared, and felt around with a foot for the cuspidor he knew was somewhere in the darkness. Driscoll came up, wiping his forehead. "I've just made the rounds," he said, "and everything looks as right as rain. Where's Ann?" "On deck somewhere, I suppose. How long is it since you saw her?" Denham chuckled. "A whole half hour?" "I'm glad," Driscoll drawled, "that I'm no cold-blooded fish," and he strolled down to the main deck. Lumpy was there, looking at the hatch with an air of puzzlement. "Seen Miss Darrow, Lumpy?" "She was here 10 minutes ago, sir. We was talking, and the monk got loose, and she sent me off to catch him. I thought she'd still be here when I got back." "Probably she went into her cabin," Driscoll surmised. Lumpy, leading Ignatz, started away in disappointment. His path led down the narrow alley into which Ann had disappeared, and as he stepped into it, his foot struck something. He stooped, picked it up, brought it back to the lighter area by the hatch. "On deck!" he shouted the next instant. "On deck! All hands on deck!" The guards took up the cry, and sailors appeared from everywhere. Driscoll, running back, came up against Inglehorn and Denham as they raced down from the bridge. All three closed in on Lumpy. "Look, sir," the old sailor stammered. "I found this on deck." "A native bracelet," cried Denham. "Some of them heathens have been aboard, sir." "Search the ship, Skipper," Denham ordered. "Where's Ann?" Driscoll cried. Inglehorn and Denham looked at one another. Then the skipper flashed off to direct the search. "In her cabin," Denham began soothingly. "She isn't. I've just looked." The voice of a guard on the island side of the Wanderer floated to the two men. "No, sir. I never heard a sound. Not a thing." Then Inglehorn's crisp, commanding tones. "Bosun, man the boats, a rifle to every man." The darkness became alive with sounds, the bosun's whistle, the creak and thump of davits, the rattle of arms, the low, directing cries of the sailors at work. Denham stared at Driscoll. "The boats!" he said explosively. "The boats! Here, Skipper! You don't really think—" "I don't know," Inglehorn replied, "but we won't lose any time finding out. Mr. Driscoll, you take charge of the party searching the ship, And work fast, my boy. Work fast. Chapter 9. Hot, native hands thrust Ann down to the bottom of the silently racing dugout. One was pressed over her mouth, and though she twisted wildly, she could send no cry back through the darkness to the wanderer. No single cry had been permitted her from the first instant of capture. Hot, pressing hands had bound and gagged her always. Her mouth had felt them first, as she stepped into the narrow black aisle beside the deckhouse, and mouth, arms, and legs had been clamped as she was passed from hands to other hands down the ship's side. Ann was afraid in a way that she had never imagined. No book she had ever read, no story she had ever been told, could equal the terror which swept her in increasing waves. It was a terror which made her feel that every inch of her insulted body was alive with unmentionable things. It went beyond the midnight horrors of childhood. It went beyond the horrors of dreams. Her single conscious thought was to cry out for help, but she told herself despairingly that even if the hand lifted from her mouth, it would do no good. Her throat, she knew, would refuse to give forth utterance. Her legs, released at last, did indeed refuse to act. When the dugout grated ashore and her captors jerked her to her feet on the beach, she could not stand. Wasting no time, two bulking shadows swung her to their shoulders and raced off through the darkness toward the village. Several times in the course of the flight, the bearers were changed. This always followed a high-pitched command. And the third time she heard it, Ann's heart leaped to a realization that the speaker was the witch doctor. The ceremonial court before the wall's great gate was bright with torches. The tribe was massed there, just as it had been massed in the afternoon. The same ordered rows lined either side of the skin-covered bridal dais. The same black guerrilla men occupied the two front ranks. The king had taken his same aloof stand, clad in the same magnificence of feathers, grass, and fur. And the witch doctor, leaving Ann's bearers to stand guard where she had been put down, promptly took his own proper position. The dais, halfway up the broad stone stairs, was empty. Ann's fear-numbed mind, however, failed to see the significance of that. Close by her, a pitying face stood out from the crowd, and Ann vaguely recognized the flower-garlanded girl of the afternoon, dressed now as all the other women were dressed. That meant nothing either. And when, at the witch doctor's signal, she was picked up and borne to the dais, she sat there in an uncomprehending stupor. Nervous haste had pulsed behind the command which put Ann into her place. The witch doctor had belabored his paddlers all the way back from the Wanderer. He had forced Ann's bearers to their highest speed on the race to the village. Now he was even more swift to set the ceremony going. Ann realized dimly that so much haste was due to a conviction that rescuers would be quick in pursuit. But the realization aroused no hope. She had been totally without hope from the moment her first cry had been stifled. She had had her own inescapable conviction that the mystery of this ancient island had trapped her and that no rescue was possible. At a signal, the massed natives began a familiar chant. Their serried ranks swayed in the torchlight in an hypnotic rhythm. The witch doctor advanced to the dais and once more performed his oddly supplicating dance. Once more, the guerrilla men leaped out from the chanting host, and now, as in the afternoon, another signal brought the king into the ceremony. He stepped forward, and at his commanding arm 10 warriors rushed at the 2 smoothly trimmed half-logs which held the great gate shut. "Des!" Ann needed no knowledge of the language to know the king had shouted. "Open!" 5 men to each bar, the gate tenders strained and slowly drew the wooden bolts back through massive time-pitted iron sockets. With still greater straining, each group began to pull its half of the great gate open. "Ndundo!" the king shouted. Instantly a warrior who had been standing on the gate's high portal struck a mighty blow against the metal drum suspended above. Briefly aroused by the rolling sound, Ann realized that the signal forecast by Driscoll had been given. It was a signal to others besides whatever bridegroom waited in the wilderness outside the wall. At the blow upon the drum, the chanting ceased. The massed ranks on either side of the dais broke. With cries of mingled excitement and apprehension, the tribesmen, and the women and children as well, fled to the wall. By frail ladders, they scrambled to the top. Once on the lofty rampart, the tribe resumed its chant, to the accompaniment of swaying torches held so as to cast most of their smoky light beyond the wall. "Tosco!" the king shouted. Now the guards picked Anne up, days and all, and rushed her through the opening gate. "Wadu!" the king shouted. Instantly the gate tenders all but joined the doors of the gate. Only the narrowest gap was left, and then 10 men braced themselves to close even this on the instant of the return of the day-sparers. Indeed, from their grim expressions, it was plain they meant to close the gap, if necessary, before the bearers got back. "Dundo!" the king shouted, and once again the drummer rolled thunder out to the black wilderness. High on the walls, the tribespeople tipped their torch for a better view. Beyond the wall, a brief plain ran off and lost itself in the darkly shadowed base of the precipice. In this plain, a few rods out, stood a stone altar as ancient as the wall it faced. Its steeply ascending steps were spotted with hoary lichens. Its platform, some dozen feet above the ground, lay under inches of furry green moss which soaked up the torch's light. 2 worn pillars, splendidly carved, rose out of the platform a short arm's width apart. "Tasco! Tasco!" the king shouted. As his voice leaped through the crack of the gate, Anne's bearers raced her at a redoubled speed up the slippery steps of the altar and swung her into position between the pillars. 2 spread her arms, while 2 more tied grass ropes to her wrists, cast loops around the pillars and drew them tight. Anne hung, barely conscious, her eyes closed. "Dundo!" the king shouted, this time to the drummer on the wall. The man swung his blunt stick again. The thunder rolled deafeningly. The crowded rampart swayed in an insane chant. Anne's bearers leaped to the ground and with fearful glances backward fled. The gate closed upon the heels of the last one, and Anne was alone, without the wall. From the shadowed base of the precipice came a deep, unreal roar which met the roll of the drum and threw it back against the wall. "Kong!" The watching, torch-illumined mob on the rampart burst into a great cry. "Kong! Kong! Kong!" A sense of impending fate lifted Anne's eyelids. She stared about in bewilderment, uncertain where she was. She looked at her wrists, and realizing now what hurt her, she struggled erect to lessen the rope's bite. Before her, she became conscious of the crowded wall. Behind her, she was aware of a closer, deeper shout, and of a shadow. She turned her head. Then, while her eyes widened, the shadow split the black cloak of the precipice and became solidly real. Blinking up at the packed wall, its vast mouth roared defiance. Its black furred hands drummed a black furred breast in challenge. In the full glare of the torches it hesitated, stopped, and as though reading the meaning of the 1,000 hands which gestured from the rampart, turned and looked down at the altar and at Anne. It did not look up at Anne upon her pedestal. It looked down. Moving closer, it stared down between the 2 pillars. High up on the wall, the tribespeople caught their breath. Their pointing arms grew motionless. Even the torch flames seemed to cease their wavering, and Anne's scream sped piercingly into a dead silence. Kong jerked back a half-step and rumbled angrily. His great hand, which had been about to touch the curious golden crest revealed by the torches, withdrew. He turned and stared suspiciously up at the wall, but when no further sound came from the crowded natives there, and no sound or further movement from the figure now drooping between the pillars, he renewed his investigation. Immediately he found that he could not pick Anne up, and shortly he found the reason. The ropes, however, offered no difficulty. The loops about the pillars broke in his hands, and he was free to explore the amazing being who drooped across his arm. Shining hair, petaled cheek, tissue garments, puzzling footgear. His fingers discovered endless mystery. In an intensity of preoccupation, he began to rumble to himself as he turned the figure over, this way and that, much in the manner that a half-adult human being might turn and inspect a limp, unconscious bird. When the crowd shouted again, he did not even look up. When new voices joined the clamor, he paid no more attention. With a last, intent look at the white countenance beneath his hand, he shifted Anne's form to the crook of one arm and started slowly back into the shadow of the precipice. The heavy creak of the opening gate drew no sign from his receding back. And when a challenging figure plunged through and cried loudly and shot a whistling something past his ear, he only leaped more quickly over the last few yards which separated him from the black, concealing wilderness. Chapter 10. It had been Denham who raced the rescue boats away from the Wanderer, and Denham who had deployed the sailors for the breathless run to the village. But from the moment the great gate swung open, Driscoll took charge. It was Driscoll who organized the pursuit after Kong. He alone had got a fair look at the beast god lumbering into the darkness with Ann's bright head cradled in one arm. The shot which accelerated Kong's last step had been his. "This is my job," he had said to Denham, and the director nodded. "Okay, Jack, we'll do it together." "I'll need a dozen of you," Driscoll cried, turning back to the crew. "Who's coming with me?" "I'll go," Lumpy volunteered, and back of him the others called out with raised hands. "You keep watch here, Lumpy," Driscoll said. "I'll take you," he pointed. "And you, and you." "Who's got the bombs?" Denham asked. "We'll need them." "Here they are," Jimmy cried, and when a bigger man offered to take them, he drew back jealously. "Not much, guy. I lugged them before. I can lug them now." "We'll leave the skipper in charge here, right?" Driscoll said to Denham. The director nodded. Together the two inspected guns, ammunition, and flashlights. "Single file," Driscoll ordered. "Never lose sight of the man ahead of you, and follow me." He set off at a trot, Denham beside him. At the altar he paused and measured the height of the pillars with his eyes. When he had done, he looked at Denham incredulously. "You got a glimpse of it too, didn't you?" Denham nodded. "I can't believe it," Driscoll said. "I got a fair look. I saw that things head squarely in line with the top of those pillars, and they stand 20 feet above the ground if they stand an inch." He shivered. "Come on," he ended. "This is wasting time." On the left, as they came to the base of the precipice, they heard water flowing in the darkness. Denham suggested that this might be a guide to some crevice which would lead them up to the plateau, so they stumbled toward it. They found a stream. In one direction, the water flowed off toward the wall. In the other, the bed of the stream ran steeply up through a narrow split in the precipice. The natural crevice inclined just steeply enough to send the water down in a swift, deep slide, but no more. "As good a swimmer as you are, Jack," said Denham, "could come down that chute." Driscoll nodded and went about the difficult business of finding a trail up. He had just found what looked like a possible path along the water's edge when one of the party called out, "Here's a track!" Driscoll turned his flashlights upon the mark of a foot so large that the men stared in unbelief, but it pointed up along the very trail Driscoll had picked out. "Let's go," he said. In the darkness, it was cruel going. A cracked shin, a bruising stumble marked nearly every yard of the way. Once a man slipped into the swift water and shot down 100 feet before he found a ledge to cling to. "I kept my gun," he gasped cheerfully as he was pulled out. Up on top of the precipice, they encountered jungle at the very outset. Enormous trees, and at their bases a lush tangle of undergrowth. The stream, widening somewhat, extended back into the country, which seemed to rise higher and higher. "We'll find that this plateau slopes gradually back to Skull Mountain," Denham surmised. Nowhere was there any sign of a trail, and for a moment all were nonplussed. "Look for a track again," Driscoll ordered. "Here is broken down brush," a sailor said. "Something big has gone through." The brakes were fresh too. "And here's that track again," cried another. The track was in a clear space beyond the broken brush, and once more it pointed upstream. It was clue enough, and Driscoll led the way as fast as he could in the darkness. "There's a bird call," Denham said after a little. "Hear it, a lot of them." The silence did indeed suddenly pulse with bird cries and the reviving whir and flick of insects. "It's dawn," Denham exulted. "Now we'll get a break, Jack. Now we'll put on speed," Driscoll promised. For a space, no change was apparent. They still moved through what seemed an utter blackness. Then slowly they could catch shadows at a distance. Next, whenever they paused to puzzle out the way, they marched ahead upon a trail grown a little plainer. And finally, unmistakably, light began to filter down. It was a shaft of this which gave them their next encouragement. It pointed to another of the great footprints. "Look at the size of the thing!" Jimmy exploded, shifting his bombs. "He must be as big as a house." "He came this way, all right," Denham said to Driscoll, "and he was headed the way we're going. Come on." "Keep those guns ready," Denham reminded the men. "He's telling us," grunted Jimmy. A wide glade opened to their weary feet. Bruised by the trees they had not been able to avoid in the darkness, stung by branches which had whipped them at every step, they stumbled into it thankfully. It was now full daylight. Except for a thin drifting mist, every tree, every bush, strand of knee-deep grass was clearly visible. Once again they came upon a footprint, and once again it led on in the direction they had been going. Driscoll had started off at a trot when Denham called out in alarm. Halting, Driscoll looked to a flank along the line of the director's extended arm. Behind him, the sailors burst into panic-stricken cries. "Kong!" someone cried. But it was not Kong. An immense beast was emerging from the jungle, a beast with a thick, scaly hide, a huge spiked tail, and a small reptilian head upon a long, swaying neck. It walked in an awkward, squatting posture upon tremendous hind legs. Its forelegs were carried elevated far up toward the base of the long neck and were more like paws. The sailors stared in confused unbelief, but Denham and Driscoll grew cold from their first full realization of the true scope of the island's mystery. "Jimmy," Denham cried, "where are the bombs?" He seized one as the beast turned in their direction. "When I throw," he called loudly, "everybody must drop in his tracks and keep his face pressed close to the earth." Still at the edge of the jungle, the beast widened its nostrils and drew in the puzzling scent of the strange creatures in the glade. Full of this, it started upon a clumsy, open-mouthed attack. The sailors scattered, Jimmy a slow last because of his burden now become doubly precious. Only Denham and Driscoll stood fast. The latter pumped 2 rifle shots into the swaying head with no effect. Denham waited patiently for the target to come closer. "When you drop," he said unhurriedly, "keep close to me and don't get up until I do." Then he threw. The missile struck squarely in front of the beast's feet. Its instant explosion enveloped feet, scaly body, and small head in a thick blue vapor. "Down!" Denham shouted, and flung himself to the ground. As Driscoll dropped alongside, the director put a hand on his mate's face to make sure it pressed close to the ground. Driscoll breathed in the damp, rich smell of earth, and the sap of growing roots grew bitter upon his lips. Just forward, the ground shook from the fall of a great weight. He would have got up, but Denham's hand pressed warningly. Finally, the hand lifted and then tapped his shoulder. Driscoll stood up. Scarcely the length of his own body away lay the outstretched, twitching head of the beast. Back of the head, the body rose like an enormous mound. The mate was amazed at the beast's proximity. "Good Lord," he exclaimed. "It came a good 50 feet after it got the gas." "But I stopped it," Denham said triumphantly. "Didn't I tell you one of those bombs would stop anything?" "Is it dead?" "No," Denham said. "But that's just a detail." He picked up his gun, walked forward, felt for the beast's heart, and shot twice. The great body started convulsively and then grew rigid. Denham hesitated, then for good measure sent a bullet through the reptilian head. Backing off to Driscoll, he stared with something of the unbelief of the sailors who now came slowly back. "Prehistoric life," he ejaculated, and turning to Driscoll he cried out, "Jack, she was right last night on the ship. Ann, I mean. But she only had the start of it. She guessed the beast god was some primitive survival. But if this thing we've killed means anything, the plateau is alive with all sorts of creatures that have survived along with Kong." Driscoll looked to see no dirt had fouled his rifle and beckoned the sailors. "Look for tracks," he ordered. "My own guess," he said slowly as the men scattered, "is that you'll find plenty of survivals, and that you won't like them half as much as you think." Tracks were easy to find in the light of day. A half-dozen men reported them, and in a little while the trail was resumed. It still led along the stream, but the land now sloped downward. "The mist is thickening," Jimmy complained. "Thickening," Denham said. "Look there." A hollow lay ahead of them. The stream ran into it, and where the hollow sank deepest, the morning mist had become almost a cloud of fog. In the midst of this, they heard a splashing. "Think it's him?" Denham said. "We'll find out," Driscoll cried and raced ahead. He was waiting in exasperation at the water's edge when the others caught up with him. Beside him was a fresh footprint not yet filled with water, although that seeped quickly into any depression made on the bank. "He got across," he said, and waved to the stream which widened almost to a small lake in the hollow. "We've got to swim." "That's out." Denham shook his head. "We can't swim with guns and bombs." "Then we can do better," Driscoll said, and pointed to 2 logs resting against the shore. "We'll build a raft." "Good," Denham agreed. "All right, boys," Driscoll called. "We're going to ferry over, on a raft." The sailors nodded, but before they could spread out to hunt for more logs and for stout, pliable vines to use as ropes, Driscoll beckoned them soberly.